I'm a huge fan of games of the PlayStation era, and more notably with games that use pre-rendered backgrounds and fixed camera angles, because I'm a huge fan of the likes of the earlier Resident Evil games. And pretty much any game that even reflected earlier titles on the system, I was usually always all over it, because I was eager to play it. Now, while all of them aren't considered great by certain standards, but there are a few that managed to appeal to a certain dynamic of players and that were a lot better than what originally thought possible, but at the same time still wouldn't reach the mass appeal of more classic games also seen on the system. And one of those games for me personally would be Hard Edge, that was released for the PlayStation in Japan in late 1998 but would later be added in North America and Europe in 1999, and would follow the role of 4 playable characters, with 2 of them being part of a tactical rescue squad, as this game Hard Edge was also known as TRAG in North America, which essentially the game would have been called TRAG, Tactical Rescue Assault Group Mission of Mercy. So it can be a bit confusing depending on the region that you're in. And this game here would use elements seen and more popularised with the likes of earlier Resident Evil titles. Essentially this is a Resident Evil clone, but there's no survival horror in it. And the plot behind this game takes place around a known tower known as the Togusa building that has been overrun with terrorists, and it is up to the characters that you'll acquire and play with in the game to stop the impending disaster. While the game does utilise elements seen in the likes of games like Resident Evil, there's also kind of reflective elements seen in popular action adventure movies or action style movies that would have been seen in years prior to that. More notably would have been the movie that comes to mind mostly when I think about it would have been the original Die Hard movie. When you look at the likes of the Nakatomi Plaza that's been overrun with terrorists, and it's up to Bruce Willis's character John McClane in order to stop the impending threat and for them to stop them from stealing all of the money and all of the data and everything that they're doing. Essentially a lot of those elements are in Hard Edge as well, but it has a more futuristic take on it compared to likes of what you would see in movies and so forth. But with the playable characters, 2 of which you start off with at the beginning, and you have a choice depending on which character you want to choose, and various choices that you make, and depending on the character's choices can influence future elements of the story in the game that can lead to a multitude of possible endings. So the 2 characters that you start off with at the beginning of the game are Alex and Michelle, that are both part of this tactical rescue squad. And then later in the game, not long into it in fact, you come across 2 other playable characters with Rachel Howard, who ends up being a professor's daughter, the professor that you have to rescue in the building itself, and Burns Byford, that's a local detective, and he's also on the search and trying to investigate elements going on within the building itself, and he's also after one of the main terrorists known as Gashu. But one of the main and unique elements that is really cool about this game is that while you do have varying story plots and arcs that can determine different choices and various ending plots, each of the characters all have their own unique attributes that will play a pivotal role later on in the game. Now with Alex and Michelle, they have your typical kind of like combat based elements, like where Alex is good with guns and long range weapons, whereas Michelle doesn't use a gun. She uses more like knife and hand to hand combat and martial arts to defeat enemies. And with Rachel and Burns, they both use physical attacks as well, but the advantages that you have with those characters, which you can change at any point once you acquire them all, because they will all help to influence various elements that will appear in the game. Because with Burns, he can move heavy objects out of the way, allowing you to get to places that you can't normally get to, while Rachel, because she's the smallest character of the group, she can find and crawl in through small places that the other characters can't get to, which again can allow you to find hidden areas or unlock elements that you can't get to with other characters. So the whole dynamic plays out really well. Games that would reflect this would be later on seen on the likes of the PlayStation and even other consoles. When you look at the likes of Martian Gothic Unification, that would have been seen on the PC and later ported to the PlayStation, along with Resident Evil 0 that used this type of dynamic, that you could acquire characters throughout your playthrough and then you could switch between alternating roles at any time that you wish. You just need to make sure that the character that you do decide to use, when you're changing from one character to the next, you have to make sure that your characters are in a safe enough spot that they won't get attacked by enemies. So once you do that, you can then switch to another character to then complete other various tasks that will unlock elements further into the game for those characters previously to be able to access that they couldn't get into before. So every interaction in the game that you have has some direct influence on the overall plot and areas that you can explore, which is pretty cool. And there's definitely a lot of replayability in this game, because again, the game has multiple endings, there's loads of secrets and elements to unlock, you've loads of different costumes and weapons to acquire with each of the characters, and they all have a direct influence on various gameplay elements. They'll make the games probably a wee bit easier for you depending on various type of tasks that you're going to complete, especially in later playthroughs. So it's worthwhile having a look. Now, in saying that, the game does have some really cool elements, and again, it's a Resident Evil clone, which for many of you, if you're into those type of games, if you're a fan of those type of games, I do recommend that you try it. But it's not without its flaws, because even when you look back at Resident Evil 1, while Resident Evil 1 is considered to not only be one of the best and probably the most important survival horror game that was ever created, but it was also known for some of its worst voice acting. But in saying that, there are games on the PlayStation and even in the current day that have acting that is way worse than Resident Evil. And some games that spring to mind for me personally when I think about it that are similar to Resident Evil would be the likes of Overblood. While I like that game as well, and I think it is a good game and worthwhile playing as well, that was developed by River Hillsoft, the acting in that at certain points in the game at least isn't great, or it's at least laughable. And then there was Countdown Vampires that was released later on, like in 2000 on the PlayStation, and that was also known for its atrocious voice acting. But in saying that, Hard Edge also falls into that category too. It has some really cool elements, it has great graphics and has really cool visual style in terms of the characters, because it uses like Japanese anime style visuals for the characters, which is really cool. But again, the acting is probably its weakest point, because it's very cheesy and very campy, and it's just completely over the top. But that's just true to the nature of what these games represented back in the day, because while the games did appeal in a playable sense, they weren't always great in terms of storytelling and acting. They hadn't perfected that point. That wouldn't have been until later on, until a few years later with games. But regardless of the acting, it's not really about that as such, because it still tells a story for what is entailed. It's how the game plays and how it makes you feel when you're playing it, and the sense of nostalgia that it gives you. That's, I think, what's more important. And in fairness to Hard Edge, one of the really cool aspects about it, compared to other games similar to it, like if we look at games the likes of, again, Overblood, there was also Men in Black, the first game in the series, there was also The Crow, there was Time Commando, and all of those games had different dynamics in terms of shooting and hand-to-hand style combat mechanics. Now, Time Commando, even though it's considered not to be great in terms of its clunkiness, in terms of its controls, it's still better than a lot of those other games that I mentioned in terms of those playable features. But Hard Edge definitely perfected that element. While the controls in terms of the character themselves can be a bit sensitive and can be a bit clunky in some regards, but the combat elements in terms of the physical style or the physical side of it is definitely one of its best features. And if anything, it's the one game on the PlayStation, especially in terms of this style with the fixed cameras, pre-rendered backgrounds, it's the only game really on the PlayStation to perfect the beat 'em up and hand-to-hand style combat with the gameplay controls. It manages to do it really well. The gameplay is very fast and focused, and it just actually works. And if you're really good at button combinations, a lot of times you don't really need to engage in gunplay with many enemies. You can literally take them out just by running up to them and just beating the hell out of them, which for most of the characters, especially when you play with the likes of Michelle and Rachel, that's essentially what you're going to be doing anyway. And even with Burns, more of it is more physical hand-to-hand combat in the game anyway, so you will be doing that. So that's the one thing with the likes of developers Sunsoft managed to do, and they did it really well. It is possibly the best game on the PlayStation in this style to utilise the beat 'em up style gameplay mechanics. Right, it's not the best game on the system by any means, but it definitely has enough cool features. Again, it's a Resident Evil clone, but removes the survival horror elements, and it is a really cool game in its own right. Even if we don't look at the cheesy voice acting for a second, there's a lot of really cool features in this game. Like, this game is massive, there's loads of different floors to explore, there's loads of rooms. You'll be playing this game for a while, especially on your first playthrough, because there's so many hidden rooms and areas to unlock, and quite possibly you mightn't get into a lot of them on your first playthrough, so which will require you to play through the game again or multiple times in order to access everything that the game has to offer, which again in turn will unlock many of the game's unlockable features that you can then use in future playthroughs. Now, in saying that, the game did receive mixed reviews back in the magazines in the day, but it was praised for its visual presence because it is a very good looking game, but it was slated in terms of its voice acting and some of the quirkier or more cheesy kind of elements in it. But that's just reflective of its time. That's just the way these games, well, it is what you make of it. Some people will enjoy these type of games, others won't. Now me personally, anything that's in this style, I love these style of games. They're quite simply, apart from racing games, I love these type of pre-rendered background, old school horror style games, or even games that aren't horror, because there's even also the likes of City of the Lost Children, which uses pre-rendered backgrounds. It was also released on the PlayStation. Now it's not survival horror either, but it has a really good story. It has some decent voice acting in it, even though it's based off of a movie. And while the tank controls are fiddly in that game, but I still enjoyed it anyway. I just enjoy those type of games. They always have a unique atmosphere and ambience that very few games have ever been able to really show off or replicate. That's why I enjoy them as much as I do, and Hard Edge was no different. I myself picked up Hard Edge, I remember it was in Dublin, and I bought it in one of the game stores that was still around at the time, and it was actually in a bargain bin. It was actually down to, it ended up being reduced down to about 15 Irish pounds at the time. And as soon as I seen it and I looked at the back cover of it and I seen that it looked like Resident Evil, I didn't even think twice. I was like, yeah, I'm buying it, that's it. Anything at the time that was like Resident Evil or even reflected it in any shape or form, I was nearly ready to buy it there and then, because I just wanted to experience it. And in fairness, I totally enjoyed it. I played that game a ton back in the day, and I played it so much so that I literally unlocked everything that the game had to offer. I played through the game as many times as I needed to unlock everything in the game. I just really enjoyed it, but bar the dodgy voice acting, but I didn't care. And that was the thing, even with Resident Evil and all those other games, I didn't care about the voice acting. To me, the voice acting wasn't the most appealing thing to me. It was the gameplay. It was how the game made you feel. It was just the unique style that all of these games had, and more so the experimental elements of these games, what they were trying to do as well, which is what I respect more than anything else. I just think these games are a lot of fun. Yes, I know they're not for everybody, and not everybody will like them, but me personally, I love them. So I would always go back to play them. And even going back and recording this video, once I sat down to play it, I played it for well over nearly an hour and a half, just messing around. And it's funny, it brought it all back to me. It just, for me, I would sit down and play these games again in a heartbeat. So yeah, it is what it is. It is what you make of it at the end of the day. But I think for me personally, it's just one of those unique and obscure hidden gems that I think everybody should at least try on the PlayStation. Even if you can overcome and put aside the dodgy voice acting and some of the niggly elements in the game, because again, these games are not perfect by any means. But if you stick with them and put time into them, you definitely will have a lot of good experiences, because there's not many people that would have had the opportunity to play these games back in the day. And I was fortunate enough to have or even own some of these games, and I really enjoyed them, so I'm sure other people would enjoy them too. It just has a lot to offer, and there's so much here to keep you playing for quite a while. So I definitely recommend that you try it. Even though there's no survival horror elements in it, I genuinely think you will enjoy this game if you enjoy all of those elements that I just mentioned. But I would love to know your thoughts of Hard Edge, or Trag as it's known in North America. And if so, what did you think of this game overall? Do you enjoy these type of games, or did you enjoy this particular game in general? And if so, what did you think of it overall? I'd love to hear whatever stories you do have of this unique game, so be sure to share it down in the comments below. And if you have enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more content around other types of games that were seen on the PlayStation similar to Hard Edge and even Resident Evil and games like it, then be sure to leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell to be updated of future videos. And again, if you would like to see more content that I already have on the channel that are very reflective of games like this, then you can check out the playlist on screen to see more of those games in action. And as always, keep those gaming memories alive.